Hello and welcome to today's show, where, as I'm sure you can see, we're talking about 100 days success plans and tips on starting a new role. And to do that, we have the magnificent Lee D'Souza. So welcome, Lee. How are you today?
I'm very well, Kirsty. I'm in a nice air-conditioned office whilst you seem to be sweating away at home.
We
But
spoke
we've
about
only
this.
got half an hour to get through this, haven't we?
Is that you just said that so that I don't dwell on the fact that you're in an air-conditioned room and I'm sweating? Okay, fair enough. Okay, right. So, Lee, just before we get started, this show is focused on candidates. So it's based on you've got the role. How can you make the most of your own role that you've got? But really, how critical are these first 100 days? You hear so much about 100-day plans. Is it really that important?
It's very critical, Kirsty. We pick up a lot of insights on the impact that execs make, both good and bad. I can think of one CEO who came into a new organization, did a brilliant floor talk, presented a beautiful PowerPoint, but basically had no plan of delivering her strategy. So she lost instant credibility, and as a result, she was out the door in 6 months, sadly. That wasn't one of our placements, I might add.
Obviously not.
So the first 100 days can be make or break. First impressions count. You need to inspire confidence. You need to establish your vision, build relationships, credibility, and buy-in. And importantly, you need that robust plan to go along with that. And I think the studies, Kirsty, show that 40% of new executives fail within the first 18 months, often due to mistakes made in the first 3 months. And on top of that, another challenge that you'll like to face is company inductions are normally insufficient. Not enough time is spent on them to help someone acclimatize. So you're going to have to be proactive. You're going to have to lift the bonnet up, do some poking around to understand what some of the underlying issues are. And more often than not, you're going to uncover issues that no one knew about. And what can help you hit the ground running is how much preparation you do before you start. And I think if you're well prepared, you'll be more confident and you'll achieve results faster.
Yeah, okay. There's just some pretty impressive statistics, actually. I didn't realize they were quite so big. Okay, Lee. So let's go right back to the beginning. What should you do before you start, before things really kick off?
Yeah, good question. So, in an ideal world, you should do your due diligence before you accept a role, which might result in you deciding you don't want to join a business. And
Mm.
too often, people join a business, then ask the questions later. And the truth is, many people spend more time researching their next mobile phone purchase they're going to buy than researching a new employer. And I think some of this is down to people being scared to ask probing questions during the interview process because they don't want to put the hiring
Mm.
organization off. I think it's only fair and reasonable. You know what you're letting yourself in for. Um, and I think the other thing that you should do during the interview process is ask your boss what is expected of me in the first 100 days. It
Yeah.
might be they're completely unrealistic, or it might be they aren't expecting too much, in which case you know you can smash it out of the park because their expectations are low. But if you do accept it, I think you want to take a whole systems approach.
Okay, can I just clarify by what you mean by a whole systems approach there?
Yeah, so you need to consider all aspects, including you, the role, the people, the processes, the external environment when planning your strategy. So, you know, you want to do a SWOT analysis on every component. So starting with yourself. So if you're moving from a functional head, you know, let's say a head of sales, head of ops to a general manager role, you're going to be managing other functional leaders that you've got no perhaps experience of. So how will you address that step up and change if you've never done it
Mm.
before? You want to do a SWOT analysis on the role itself. Is it an established role? Is it a new role? If you have a team, what are their strengths and weaknesses? Um, then how does your vision for the role link to the vision for the organisation or the division that you're in, and then also the bigger picture, the market, as well as your kind of internal or external customers. So you're then going to perhaps have some knowns, some unknowns, and there'll be some unknowns, to paraphrase Donald Rumsfeld, US Defense Secretary, Kirsty. The more you know up front, Kirsty, the easier it will be.
Yeah, but it is okay to have some kind of question marks in there. You don't have to have every
You can't
single
know
answer.
everything.
Yeah.
You can't know everything, and you know, time may well be an issue if you're, you know, most of us are still in a role before we move on to another one. But you want to try and do as much as you can if you can.
Yeah, I think probably almost some ways as well, having a question mark is a good thing, because I don't want the arrogance of someone assuming that they know everything. I like the idea that they're like, oh, I don't know that yet, but I'll figure it out or have a plan to work around it. So I enjoy that. Okay, so we understand how critical 100-day plans are and why they're so important. And we kind of understand the element of like due diligence, looking at the whole thing in advance before you even start getting to your 100-day plan, the kind of background to it. And we spoke about this before. This 100-day plan is being created kind of well before you turn up on site for day one, isn't it? So can you tell us what your advice is for actually creating the 100-day plan itself?
Yeah, so first of all, I mean, there are experts out there more qualified than me on writing 100-day plans who I will recommend to you, but I've got some starting points for people to get started. So you want to start with the end in mind, meaning if you think about your vision for the role, it means you'll be more strategic about what you have to achieve in the first 100 days. So start with a 3-year horizon and what you want to achieve within your 3 years. Then you establish your first 12-month strategic priorities. Then and only then are you ready to write your 100-day plan. Some of the feedback I hear on 100-day plans that have been written by execs is that they don't perhaps write a proper plan. They write a to-do list, which is not a plan. And they can perhaps be too narrow. So they might only focus on their functional area rather than remember they're also part of a leadership team. So a sales director just focuses on his sales plan, forgetting that he's also part of a leadership team. He's not taking into consideration how he's going to interact with the marketing department. So again, it's that kind of whole systems approach. So as I said, there's lots of experts out there, books that can help you write a 100-day plan. I've got 2 books I'd recommend. The First 90 Days by Michael Watkins, which if you're a Harrison Bridge placement, Kirsty, then you receive this in the post.
Oh, well, that's handy, isn't it?
I don't know how many other recruiters help their candidates get up to speed. I don't know.
None that I've heard of. That's what I could say.
That's one book. There's also another one by, I think I pronounced the name as Neve Keith.
Neve, yeah.
The First 100 Days. By the way, someone asked on the comments, why 100 days, not 90 days? I think, well, the extra 10 days can make a difference, can't it? You know, it gives you more time to kind of learn and initiate change. So I think having more time is better than less.
I think so too. I agree with that.
So broadly speaking, before you start, you want to define what success looks like, set your SMART goals. The first 30 days, listen and learn, speak to as many people and stakeholders as possible to kind of understand the current state. And I think some people find it hard to listen. They just want to go in and make it happen. So I think there's some patience that needs to be done there to establish all the facts.
I suppose as well, like your really only experience of the company at this point has been external. You've been interviewing, perhaps, maybe you've spoken to somebody, you've done research, but when you're in the company and you really can kind of understand and hunt around, you get a lot more information, don't you?
You do, absolutely. And I think quite often the people on the shop floor can tell you things that the leadership team, the chief exec, hasn't got a clue about, and quite often, it's those that are on the shop floor that have actually got the answers to solve some of the biggest problems, but just no one asks them.
Yeah.
So that's the first 30 days. Days 31 to 60, assess and plan. So evaluate what you've learned, create a detailed action plan to address those priorities. And then days 61 to 100, you want to start taking action based on your plan. So focusing on quick wins to help you build momentum, credibility. And, you want to be making sure that you're communicating your progress regularly to keep everyone engaged and bought in. So that stakeholder buy-in throughout is really important to make sure that they are on the same mindset, that everyone's aligned. Sounds easy peasy, Kirsty.
I was going to say, on paper, that sounds like anybody could do it, Lee.
Yeah, but as Mike Tyson said, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face. So you have to expect the unexpected. You need to be agile. You've only got to look at what's happened in the last 4 years: COVID, energy crisis, wars, geopolitical uncertainty ad infinitum. But we do need to have a plan. But you perhaps you're going to probably have to adjust as you go along. But we want to go back to having the end in mind. And I think that's also really important because I think a lot of execs are super ambitious. If you want to move on to a bigger role internally in your organization, you need to have a succession plan. So being strategic will help you advance your career. And all the best execs I know are thinking about making their move every 12 to 18 months.
Okay, that makes sense. I think with that, expect the unexpected. Like you say, you right at the beginning said you have to sort of start thinking 3 years ahead, and then you go like, what's going to happen in the next year? So those things may not necessarily change, but within the 100-day plan, what you're tweaking and how you're getting to those kind of milestones, that's what you have to adjust, right? Or is it everything goes out the window?
No, I think you're always kind of checking: are we on track with the kind of strategic goals, or do we need to, or strategic objectives in the first 12 months, and do we need to adjust them? Most of the time, there's always perhaps going to be tweaks. No business, ever has straight line growth, does it? There's always kind of bumps in the road where you do have to adjust things accordingly.
Okay.
And it could be a complete pivot. What you thought it might be, that you go in and you were told the products are ready to be sold, and actually you find out they're not, and then there's going to be quite a lot of change.
I imagine that instance, yes, they would be. Okay, so I think I understand kind of in a broad spectrum how that 100-day plan breaks down, but do you have any practical tips for navigating those first 100 days?
Yeah, I think that perhaps the number one is focusing on quick wins. And a lot of the best executives I've worked with have always focused on that because it inspires confidence in everyone. It helps justify your hire, makes you feel good when you've got a win. Bernard Looney, the former CEO of BP, whatever you think about him, within the first week of starting as CEO of BP, he announced their goal to achieve net zero by 2050. At the time, very well received by investors, their staff, and then suddenly everyone wanted to work for BP. So if you can identify high impact areas and align them with the strategic goals, that's a really good thing to do. Depending on your role, it might be that there's normally perhaps opportunities for low-hanging fruit. And often in an organization, there are things that go unquestioned. So I interviewed a HR director last week who reviewed their office space, which is good practice in terms of the contract breaks. And she realized they could move to a better space with a better location and save £3 million. How happy do you think the CEO would have been with that hire? Put my feet up, job's done.
Yeah, paid for yourself 10 times over. Yeah, that is a big old win. Yeah. Okay. All right. So those quick wins, as many as you can get in to really kind of cement that you were the right choice. That's number one. What would number two be?
Stakeholder management. I'm going to go all out and say you cannot be successful in a senior role without strong relationship building skills, particularly in those big corporates. To get stuff done, you've got to build networks, allies, um, but you've got to be very proactive. So go and have one-to-ones with the key stakeholders, your peers, perhaps other divisions. Um, Ask them how you can help them, ask them what their challenges are, and listen. Then they're more likely to help you. And it's kind of understanding how the business works, how things get done. And I think in those first 100 days, you want to be doing more listening than talking. In fact, that probably should never change.
Yeah.
And you want to do it with empathy, with humility, not make assumptions. And I think also, I was going to say, on day one, I'd recommend sending out an email to your direct reports and peers that you're looking forward to meeting them. You're going to schedule a one-to-one. Very few people do that, and it sets you apart and sends a really nice message to the business.
I really like that as a tip, kind of putting yourself out there as a person that's easy to work with right at the beginning. But with this, you mentioned obviously direct reports and peers. Would you include those people that you mentioned earlier, those people kind of lower down who maybe are, in the thick of it and know things that you wouldn't? Would you include those in this area, or is that something else?
Um, you perhaps want to make sure that you're joined up with the business around comms. So I think, and I think this is probably forgotten about actually around a communication strategy to keep people in the loop, because when a new exec joins, there's perhaps some fear and uncertainty. So ideally, the business would do a comms piece around your role and what you're going to be doing, and then you, when you join, are going to be perhaps doing a comms piece to the business as well, saying looking forward to meeting people, what your role entails.
Okay, fair enough. Okay, so we've got some quick wins. We're kind of managing those stakeholders who are within the business, and we're listening more than we're talking. And I really like that, sending out an email kind of right at the beginning saying you're going to have one-to-ones, you're going to be introducing yourself. I really enjoy that. What's the final tip that you've got for us?
Understand the company culture. So at Harrison Bridge, we know that one of the reasons why people get fired is because of cultural fits. And you cannot assume doing what you did in the last organization is the right thing to do or behave in your new one. So you need to spend some time observing the organization's culture and dynamics. So I'll give you an example, perhaps not the best example, but in some big corporates, it's acceptable to have your video camera off during video calls. My mate Pete does this, then he goes off for a bike ride. That's a different story. I'd say probably in most organizations, that's completely inappropriate and disrespectful. So I think you need to understand the kind of inner workings, the formal, informal power structures, the communication styles, the decision-making processes, how shit gets done, and that kind of stakeholder management piece where you're talking to your peers, what should I know between you and I that wasn't in the induction?
Yeah. And this is, when you say understand the company culture, that doesn't mean that you should be planning on changing it in those first 100 days. It is literally just gathering information, seeing if you can find any gaps, or are you actually thinking that you should change some stuff there as well?
That's a really good question, because you can have a company culture, but a team, department, division might have a completely different culture. So actually, when you're interviewed for a role, you want to talk about, is this role evolution or is it revolution? How do you describe the culture, the dynamics of this particular division that I'm inheriting, and is it as you would like? and what is my bandwidth for making change.
Yeah. So if there's something that you think, oh, this is, this is a real big bomb that potentially could go off, you think, well, that might be a bit more urgent. If you're like, okay, there's tweaks, you might want to kind of figure out what your priority order before you start going in and revolution, as you say it, which I think is a really good term for it.
Yeah, that's a good point, because actually some people are real big change agents, and if they're not allowed to go and make change happen, they'll hate it. So it's understanding what your mandate is and what you're allowed and not allowed to do up front.
Yeah, I suppose again it goes to that stakeholder thing as well, because some people are really resistant to change. It's sometimes can be scary. Sometimes, particularly if someone new comes in, they're like, everyone's kind of waiting on tender hooks for, oh, what's going to happen now? What's, everything's going to change. We're going to have all these new systems. It's going to annoy everybody. So sometimes understanding what you currently have, understanding how people feel about it before you're coming up with any plans for revolution, I think is probably.
Yeah, and if you can speak to the predecessor that was in your role, if that was the case, around, it's that SWOT analysis piece, isn't it? What are the strengths and weaknesses? Is there some resistance to change? Who's going to be on the bus? Who is likely to not be on the journey?
Who's the early adopter in that? Okay. I think I understand. Okay. So I like those tips. So thing is, Lee, is often, somebody like you who speaks to so many people and deals with so many people, you're going to see common mistakes, common pitfalls that people fall into that kind of regularly happen. So we want to avoid those, obviously. So can you give us some sort of, can you open our eyes to things that we should be aware of to avoid?
I can. And you talked about people not liking change. So I can think of one CEO who was described by one of his executive direct reports as someone that came in with a chainsaw above his head and waving it around, trying to kill everyone, and just caused utter chaos, carnage, and fear. So, as I said, you need to take people on a journey, not scare the shit out of them when you first start. So people don't like change. So before you make change, you need to get their buy-in, not impose change on them. So I think understanding good change principles to get people on the journey before you impose it upon them. I think there's better ways of telling people this is what we're doing now and ripping everything up.
Yeah, kind of making them part of the journey as well. Like, I've taken suggestions and everybody said that this may not be working, so we're going to come up with a plan, rather than, because sometimes when you go in somewhere, there are really good reasons why people do it certain ways. And if you just come in and change it with no sort of thought and consideration, there's going to be rebelling, I imagine.
Yeah, and knowing like senior leaders, high performers want results, they can see obvious problems, but you actually need to kind of go to through those first 30 days just to listen, get them on board, for them to tell you this isn't working, so that they then come up with the answers themselves that we need to do something different.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So a couple of other examples. I can think of two instances where a chair and then a CEO in a different organization tried to make change to conservative businesses where they didn't have stakeholder approval. In both cases, the chair and the CEO were exited due to frustration on both sides. So I think that was a failure at board level. Thankfully, again, not one I was involved in. Neither side asked for each other's vision. And if they had, they would have realized it wasn't a match.
Yeah.
And then my final example is the challenges of going between a corporate to a SME business and vice versa. So I can think of one C-suite executive I placed from a corporate background into a small business, sent him the first 90 days book. Within the first 2 weeks, they completely changed his role. It came as a complete shock to him. He was completely prepared for it. So it's important to kind of understand the pace and the decision-making process of a in the organisation you join.
Do you think there is a bit of a culture shock when you go kind of from larger to SME and vice versa? Do you think that's a common thing that happens?
It is, because in a bigger corporate, you're used to larger budgets, bigger teams, decision making is a lot slower. You can hide a little bit. You've got a little bit longer. Whereas in an SME business, there is no hiding. It's roll your sleeves up. Decisions are made just like that, which could be that we're pivoting and we're changing direction to do something completely different right now.
Yeah. It's the difference between turning a cruise ship and turning a jet ski, I guess. A big corporate, it takes, lots of planning and milestones, whereas a jet ski, an SME, you can just turn on the dime. Okay. Yeah. All right. Okay, Lee, I think we're coming sort of towards the end of the show now. And now in a second, I'm going to do a summary and then come to the kind of top tip. People are looking at this, they're, starting somewhere new or something's happening and they want the 100-day plan top tip, which I'm going to come to you for in a second. But before then, can we talk about the next show that we've got, which I believe is towards the end of July? And I believe it's James Higgins is coming to talk to us.
It's Wednesday, the 24th of July with James Higgins of Talan, I think is the company who he works for, who acquired his previous company, GemServe. So James and I are going to discuss what the new government is going to mean for the energy sector. So if you want an invite to that, please write policy in the comments and I'll send you an invite when we have created the show.
I think we're all going to be interested in that one because it's going to be a big old change, I think. Okay, just before we move on, Mark here has said, based on the SME kind of big conversation we had, having worked across corporate and SME organizations, I can personally attest to how very different the challenges are. So thank you, Mark, for reinforcing what Lee said. Okay, Lee, it's always my job at this point to sort of do a quick summary. And we've gone through quite a lot today, I feel like. So I feel like it's really important, those first 100 days are really important to sort of set how you carry on for the rest of your time there. And you need to start with the end in mind. So consider what your kind of 3-year, 2-year plan is, then do your 1 year and then pull it back and continually kind of find these milestones for it. The first 30 days, you're pretty much listening and learning. Although I actually think from what you've said, that continues on through the whole 100 days. There's a lot of 2 ears and 1 mouth and use them in that kind of order. So you're listening and learning for the first 30 days, figuring out what's happening. Then, day 31 to 60, you're assessing a bit more. You're kind of planning what you potentially going to do and how it's going to work. And then that 60 to 100 days is where action's going to start happening. And no matter how well we plan, no matter how well we organize, we should always expect the unexpected. As you said very eloquently, the last 4 years have taught us that stuff comes out of the woodwork. The world can go up and down in various ways. So whilst you should have your plan in mind, there is a flexibility that you should have to it and an ability to pivot on there. And then to be successful, you need to sort of focus on those quick wins. You need to make sure you're managing your stakeholders, be open to them, be available to them, and then make sure you understand the company culture of where you are. It's so easy to just go in and be so excited about everything, but there are pre-existing things in place, so you have to understand what they are to see their purpose, to see if they need changing, and so on and so forth. How did I do for a summary, Lee?
What a fantastic job, Kirsty, you did. And I think you raised another point there of the challenge of doing all of this, because myself included, is that we struggle to balance the strategic side of our roles with the tactical side of our roles. And I think by starting with what the vision is and the 3-year plan, that kind of helps to constantly remind you every 3 months, where are we heading? Are we on track, or do we need to adjust?
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. Okay. Right, Lee, top tip. Someone's watching this and they're thinking, right, my first 100 days needs to be a success. What would you say is the thing that they should do to make this most likely to happen?
I would try and negotiate, as part of the offer, executive coaching for the first 6 months. And if not, and if you can't do that, consider paying for it yourself.
Mm.
And you can get that for as little as £100 a month.
Wow.
Because being an executive director, it can be a lonely place. A lot of us suffer from imposter syndrome. You may face challenges that you're not used to. There's lots of evidence having an executive coach can improve your performance, improve your relationships with your boss, your peers, your direct reports. You can talk about any challenges you've got with some of those direct reports to get the best out of them.
Mm.
So I think, having a coach can help you with the challenges you're going through. And it's going to help you sleep better at night as well. And I've got a second one, Kirsty. I know I'm not allowed to have 2 tips.
I don't normally allow it, and you've snuck this up on me, but I will allow it this time.
Well, thank you, Kirsty. I really appreciate that. So when you've completed your 100 days and you realise you've got some underperformance or gaps in your leadership team, which is normally the case, call Leader Souza to help you recruit the best senior talent in energy and utilities.
I think that's a no-brainer of a top tip there. I think snuck that in. I very much appreciate it. Yeah, no, I think those are fantastic. I think today's been a really, really good show. I think there's been a lot of information in there. So I think we've done really well. Just a reminder, even if you're watching the recording of this, either on LinkedIn or on YouTube, put policy below and we will make sure that you get an invite to the next show. Okay, Lee, it's time we're done. So I want to thank you, everybody who's watched and the comments that you guys have made. So thank you very much. And I want to thank Lee for just being so magnificent and sharing so much with us today.
Thank you, Kirsty. Look forward to seeing you all next time.